All of you watching on PBS and around the globe, a warm welcome to BBC World News. President Putin has announced a partial military mobilisation to help fight the war in Ukraine. In a television address, President Putin said the West wanted the end of Russia just as it had brought the Soviet Union to an end. It comes a day after Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine announced votes on joining Russia would be held. That mobilisation, the first since World War II, is aimed at those with previous military experience and begins right now. 30,000 reservists will also be called up to reinforce the Russian military in Ukraine. Mr. Putin said he would support independence in areas of eastern Ukraine currently controlled by Russia-backed separatists. Here's some of what President Putin said in his address on Russian television.
I repeat, we're talking of a partial mobilization only. Only people in the military reserve will be drafted. The priority will be on people who served in the armed forces, who have military specialization and experience. Those drafted before being sent to the places of service will have mandatory additional training, relying on experience gained during the special military operation. The decree on partial mobilization has been signed.
Well, the Russian president also issued this blunt warning.
I want to remind those who allow themselves such statements about Russia that our country also has a variety of weapons of destruction. And if the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will, without question, use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff.
Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg, who's in Moscow, has more.
What we heard, first of all, from the Russian president was an admission that things haven't been going that well in Ukraine. Until today, the official message from the Kremlin to the people here has been that everything is going according to plan with this special military operation. Well, it clearly isn't. If the Russian president is now declaring a partial mobilization and calling up potentially 300,000 military reservists, things haven't been going according to plan. But did he say to the Russian people, sorry, this was our mistake, we got it wrong? Of course he didn't. Vladimir Putin did what he does so often. He turned attention to the West and blamed the West and accused the West of wanting Russia's destruction, wanting the disintegration of Russia, blamed everything on the collective West, as he put it. So that was the admission. And then, of course, we got the threat. And he made it very clear. He said Russia would use all its means at its disposal to defend Russia if its territorial integrity was threatened. Now, what's that all about? Well, in a few days' time, we've got these so-called referendums coming up in Russian-occupied areas, territories of Ukraine. And everybody expects that once the votes are counted, with the Kremlin counting the votes, these territories will have voted to join Russia. And I think what Putin is saying today is sending a very clear message to Ukraine and to the West that once these territories have been annexed by Russia, if you try to attack them or if you try to take these areas back, then Russia will respond with force. And he said, this is no bluff. And he had at the end this other threat. Those who try to blackmail us with nuclear weapons should know the prevailing winds can turn in their direction. That is a message to the West that Russia has nuclear weapons and, he claims, I think, will be prepared to use them.
And Steve, how alarming will leaders gathering at the United Nations General Assembly in New York already trying to decide how to face what's going on in Ukraine?
Of course, I think world leaders will be alarmed. It's interesting, Vladimir Putin was at a regional summit last week. And the message he seemed to get from the leader of China and the leader of India was that basically war isn't a good idea, that actually perhaps de-escalation would be a good idea. It's the message he seems to have got from the Turkish president too. And yet, what we see from Vladimir Putin is escalation after escalation. This is not a leader who is putting his hands up and saying, I got this wrong, I need to get out of this somehow. He's in it deep, and he's getting deeper and deeper, and he's determined to achieve some kind of military victory. and pushing things as far as he can get, and sending very strong message today, as we've heard, to Ukraine and to the West.
Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. Gillian Keegan is a minister at the British Foreign Office. She gave the BBC her reaction to Mr. Putin's speech a short while ago.
It's a serious threat, but one that has been made before. Clearly, I guess over the last couple of weeks, the Russian military have lost significant ground to the Ukrainians, and I guess that's caused perhaps this speech today. But yes, it's a serious threat, but I say one that's been made before. But let us be clear, it doesn't change our stance. We're still unwavering in our support for Ukraine. In fact, the Prime Minister will make a speech today which says, you know, we've already committed £2.3 billion to support Ukraine with their military weapons to make sure that they do have the support that they need, and we will continue to do that again next year. We will match that next year. So we are there, and we are there to support our Ukrainian colleagues who obviously are on the ground suffering a lot right now.
Gillian Keegan. Western leaders have been unequivocal in their condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. At the United Nations General Assembly currently meeting in New York. Here is just a flavour of some of what the leaders have been saying before President Putin announced that partial mobilisation.
Or, cet héritage.
Today we need to make a simple choice, basically that of war or that of peace. On the 24th of February this year, Russia, a permanent member of the Security Council, through an act of aggression and invasion and annexation, broke our collective security. It deliberately violated the UN Charter and the principles of sovereign equality of states.
It's imperative to maintain the international order, where the rule of law is firmly established. The United Nations has been playing a central role in the development of such international order. However, we see today its foundations being gravely shaken. Russia's aggression against Ukraine is an act that tramples on the vision and principles of the UN Charter.
141 countries categorically condemned Russia's war for occupation. But that alone isn't enough.